On the third day of the third moon of 129 AC, a servant entered the royal chambers in the Red Keep, only to find that King Viserys, ancient and feeble, had died in his sleep. The humble chamberlain rushed to inform Queen Alicent of her husband's passing. Should the late king's wishes have been honoured, then Alicent should have sent a raven to Dragonstone Keep, the seat of Princess Rhaenyra, and informed her to come to King's Landing to take the Iron Throne as the king's chosen heir. However, the queen had other plans. Throwing the servant into the black cells to ensure word of Viserys' death would not spread to the public, she ordered a secret meeting of the small council, with the aim of persuading them to recognize her son, Aegon, as ruler in Rhaenyra's stead. The council was deeply torn. On one hand, Viserys had made his court swear fealty to Princess Rhaenyra as his heir 20 years ago, but on the other, Prince Aegon was male, and by law of primogeniture, males come before females. Eventually, Sir Criston Cole, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, made a very convincing argument on Prince Aegon's behalf when he slit the throat of Lord Leman Beesbury, Master of Coin, and Rhaenyra's staunchest supporter within the council. None were more surprised by the small council's decision to crown Prince Aegon than Aegon himself, who at first was reluctant to take the crown, knowing it would be going against his late father's wishes. This humility was smacked out of him by his mother, who, probably correctly, convinced him that Rhaenyra was not wont to reward such loyalty and was more likely to simply slit the young prince's throat to remove him as a threat. Thus, 7 days after the death of King Viserys, King Aegon Targaryen, second of his name, ascended unto the Iron Throne of Westeros. Days later, word of this reached Princess Rhaenyra in Dragonstone. Presently pregnant with her fourth child, the shock of her siblings' betrayal induced her to miscarry the baby. This tragedy, however, was not enough to deter Rhaenyra from claiming her inheritance. At Dragonstone, she gathered her loyal supporters and formed a new government, the Black Council. Thus, war was on. A war that would leave Westeros bathed in fire and ruin, as a brother and sister shed the blood of thousands over a dynastic spat, which in turn would see the power and prestige of House Targaryen take a fatal blow from which it would never recover. Indeed, before the imminent Dance of the Dragons, House Targaryen had 18 dragons to command. By the war's end, all but 2 would have been slain. While lords and notables from across Westeros's many noble houses would inevitably involve themselves in the war between King Aegon and Princess Rhaenyra, the Dance of the Dragons was at heart an interdynastic dispute. Thus, with both sides of the conflict led by various peoples named Targaryen, it is necessary to break down which Targaryens served on which side to belay the inevitable confusion. Among the chief supporters of King Aegon's faction, Aegon the Greens, was the young king's younger brother, Aemond Targaryen. Rider of the dragon Vagar, Aemond was possessed of a legendary temper. Having lost an eye in a grudge match with his cousin at the tender age of 10, he encrusted a sapphire into the empty socket where the eye had once been. King Aegon also had a second younger brother, Daeron, who was gentler and more charming than Aemond, but a dragon rider and a capable warrior all the same. On the other side, Princess Rhaenyra's Black Council included her 3 eldest sons, Jaehaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey Targaryen, each one a dragon rider. Present also was the 55-year-old Lady Rhaenys Targaryen, sister of the late King Viserys, rider of the massive worm Meleys, and wife to Corlys Velaryon, owner of the largest fleet in the realm. Finally, chief among Rhaenyra's supporters was her uncle and husband, Prince Daemon Targaryen, rider of the mighty dragon Caraxes, and widely considered to be the most dangerous man in Westeros. At the onset of the war, King Aegon had the loyalty of the majority of Westeros's great lords, and in comparison, Rhaenyra's support across the realm was very limited. However, the Black Princess had one major advantage. While Aegon's faction only had 4 dragons, hers had 11, albeit only 6 presently had riders. This gave Rhaenyra a potent advantage in firepower, but this alone would not carry her to victory, for while dragons can burn down a city, it took armies to conquer and hold it. To that end, Queen Rhaenyra opted to use diplomacy, sending out 2 of her sons to parley with the great feudal lords of Westeros to earn their support. In the Eyrie, White Harbour and Winterfell, Prince Jacaerys found success, as the Arryns of the Vale pledged their loyalty to Rhaenyra, as did the Starks of Winterfell and their prosperous Manderly allies. However, when the Black Princess's middle child, Lucerys, arrived upon the lands of the Baratheons atop his dragon Arrax, he did not find himself so lucky. An eye for an eye, a son for a son. After the deaths of Lucerys and Jaehaerys, both the Greens and the Blacks had committed egregious acts of kinslaying, and as a result, both Princess Rhaenyra and King Aegon were consumed by grief, rage, and a bitter desire to see the other and all their supporters brutally exterminated. No longer was the Dance of Dragons a petty dynastic dispute which could be resolved with some clever politicking. Now, it was a fight to the death. Knowing that total war was on the horizon, Sir Otto Hightower, Hand of the King, intensified his desperate attempts to secure the oaths of the realm's most powerful lords. But the lords of the North and the Vale were firmly behind Rhaenyra, and the Greyjoys of the Iron Islands and the Martells of Dorne both snubbed the Royal Council's advances. Even in the Reach, where support for King Aegon was supposed to be the strongest, dozens of minor houses had declared for the Black Council, throwing the region into chaos. In the Riverlands, the Rhaenyra-aligned House Blackwood broke the power of Aegon-aligned House Bracken in a pair of actions at the Battle of the Burning Hill and the Taking of Stonehenge. With his pool of potential allies on the continent rapidly thinning out, Sir Otto Hightower began enticing the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, a triarchy of the city-states of Myr, Lys and Trioche, over to King Aegon's side, with promises of trade concessions. However, the Neo-Valyrian cities dragged their feet on their response, and growing frustrated with his grandfather's constant diplomatic shortcomings, King Aegon dismissed Sir Otto as Hand of the King, replacing him instead with the younger, more efficient, and more ruthless Sir Criston Cole. Sir Criston's counsel for King Aegon was simple. Trying to secure the loyalty of Westeros' lords through diplomacy and the Olive Branch had clearly failed, so it was time to get through to them by way of the Targaryen's house words, fire and blood. Setting forth from King's Landing with dragons, an army, and his new hand at his side, Aegon began doing just that, subjecting the pro-Black harbour town of Duskendale to a brutal sack. The royal campaign next proceeded to Rook's Rest, whose ruling house, the Stauntons, had also pledged loyalty to Rhaenyra. When Sir Criston arrived with the king's forces, he found Rook's Rest barred, and since Aegon and his dragon were ostensibly not with him at the time, the ruthless Hand of the King resorted to pillaging his way throughout the hinterlands of Staunton territory. In desperation, Lord Staunton had a raven sent to Dragonstone, beseeching his liege Queen Rhaenyra to send out her dragon riders to save his fief. The queen acquiesced, and sent her aunt Rhaenys riding atop the great drake Meleys. As it turned out, Sir Criston's real goal all along had been to draw out one of the Black Council's dragons. No sooner had Rhaenys and Meleys taken to the field than they were swept down upon by not one but two dragon riders, Prince Aemond atop Vagar and the king himself atop Sunfire. 1,000 feet in the air, the three giant beasts fought viciously, ducking and weaving amidst columns of searing dragon flame. While the Black Queen's aunt and her dragon were slain, King Aegon was severely burnt in the struggle, and Sunfire mortally wounded. The king would essentially be in a coma for the following year, and his dragon's combat utility was crippled. Consequently, Prince Aemond took his place as the functioning head of the Greens. Upon hearing of his wife Rhaenys' death, Lord Corlys Velaryon threatened to abandon Rhaenyra's cause, and had to be mollified by Prince Jacaerys, who made him Hand of the Queen. After settling that matter of state, Prince Jacaerys turned his attention to the Blacks' unmanned dragons. After the deaths of Lucerys and Rhaenys, the Blacks had 9 dragons left, but only 3 had riders. Wanting to attack the capital with as many dragon riders as possible, Jacaerys looked far and wide for bastards of Targaryen lineage, whose illegitimate status had condemned them to life as lowborns, but whose blood may allow them to tame the presently masterless dragons. Many glory seekers from across the 7 kingdoms answered Jacaerys' call. Most ended up as a giant lizard's aperitif, but after many deaths, new riders emerged. The dragon Vermithor was claimed by Hugh Hammer, the son of a blacksmith, Silverwing by a humble man-at-arms named Ulf White, Seasmoke by the 15-year-old Adam of Hull, and Sheepstealer by a girl named Nettles, the daughter of a dockside whore. While Jacaerys was arming peasants with giant sentient napalm machines, Queen Rhaenyra had taken the safety of her remaining children in mind. Given all the brutal kinslaying going on lately, she had her two youngest sons, Viserys aged 8 and Aegon the Younger aged 10, on a ship to Pentos, where she hoped they could wait out the rest of the war in safety. This would not play out as she hoped. While crossing the narrow sea, the ship carrying the two princes happened upon 90 warships of the combined navies of Lys, Myr and Tyrosh, who, as it turned out, had decided to ally with the Greens after all. Naturally, the Associ ships attempted to capture the boys. Frantically mounting his young dragon Stormcloud, young Aegon was able to fly back to Dragonstone, although his dragon was mortally wounded by Lycian ballistae in the attempt, and would die soon after. Viserys, meanwhile, who possessed only a dragon egg, was captured by the Lycian admiral, Sharako Lahar. Immediately spirited back to Essos, he would spend the rest of the war in comfortable captivity. Enraged, Prince Jacaerys, flanked by his ascendant peasant dragon riders, mounted up and descended upon the Associ fleet with a fury. They did not have to fly far, for Admiral Sharako had already arrived upon the shores of Dragonstone, where he had subsequently ambushed and done great damage to Lord Corlys Velarion's fleet. Upon pillars of Dragonflame, Jacaerys and his dragon seeds eviscerated the navy of the Three Sisters. But in what was becoming a running theme, their victory would be a costly one. During the battle, Jacaerys flew too low, and his dragon was entrapped by grapnels and scorpion bolts, getting caught in the rigging of a sinking ship and drowning. Jacaerys himself would perish amidst a hail of Myrish crossbow bolts. Following what became known as the Battle of the Gullet, Queen Rhaenyra had eliminated King Aegon's principal source of naval power, but had lost her eldest son and heir and yet another dragon in the process. Although both sides were rapidly losing manpower, leaders and morale, the war raged on unabated. At Honeywine, the main Green army in the Reach, led by Ormond Hightower, was thrown into peril when it was pincered between two black forces, led by Thaddeus Rowan and Tom Flowers. Surrounded and on the brink of annihilation, the Lord Hightower's salvation came in the form of the dragon Tessarion, commanded by Prince Daeron, King Aegon's genteel younger brother. The Green Council received news of this victory boisterously, but the Reach was not their principal concern at the present. To King Aegon's councillors, the main black threat was the ever-deadly Prince Daemon, presently garrisoned with his dragon at Harrenhal. To that end, Prince Aemond and Sir Criston launched a northwards campaign with ground troops and dragons alike, with the intent to recapture Harrenhal, only to discover that upon arrival, the massive citadel was abandoned, and Daemon nowhere to be seen. The Green reclamation of the largest castle in the Riverlands turned the entirety of central Westeros into an active battleground. It was here the Lannisters, allied with the Greens, joined the fray with a host of some 8,000 men, defeating the black-aligned Western Riverlords at the battles of the Red Hawk and Acorn Hill. However, in these triumphs, the Lord Jason Lannister was slain, as was his most capable commander, Adrian Tarbeck. This left the leadership of the Lannister host in the hands of the elderly, infirm and incapable Lord Humphrey Lefford, who would ultimately lead his army to its doom. When granted an audience in Storm's End, he found the Lord Boros Baratheon, flanked by none other than Aemond Targaryen, standing stoically at the Stormlord's side. The Baratheons had already declared for King Aegon, and Lucerys was told to leave. His diplomatic mission a failure, the young princeling mounted himself atop Arrax and began the flight back to Dragonstone. He would never make it. As a storm raged over Shipbreaker Bay, another pair of bronze wings cut through the din. Aemond, riding atop his massive worm Vagar, had descended upon his prey. What followed was more a murder than a fight, for Vagar was a much bigger dragon than Arrax, and Aemond a much more skilled rider than Lucerys. 3 days later, the scaled body of Arrax and his young rider washed up on the beach outside Storm's End. Upon hearing of her son's death, Princess Rhaenyra collapsed into a spiral of grief, and her will to continue the fight was broken. Until, that is, two pieces of news arrived from her husband, Prince Daemon. Firstly, the Castellan of Harrenhal, no doubt remembering how Dragonfire had roasted King Harren in that very same castle 130 years earlier, bloodlessly surrendered the keep to the Blacks after Prince Daemon landed atop its battlements on his hulking dragon Correctness. This put the most important castle, and by extension most of the Riverlands, under Rhaenyra's control. Secondly, word had also reached Daemon of Lucerys' death, and he promised that he would avenge the boy. To that end, Daemon reached out to two old contacts of his in King's Landing, a former sergeant in the City Watch, known by the alias of Blood, and a rat catcher who worked in the Red Keep, known by the alias of Cheese. These two humble, low-born lowlifes would be the Black Council's instrument of vengeance. As long-time servants of the royal family, both Blood and Cheese knew every nook and cranny of the Red Keep, and thus were able to sneak into the royal bedchambers undetected. One night, as Helena, sister queen of King Aegon, was tucking her children into bed, the two assassins burst into her chambers and barred the door behind her. They put her sons, Maelor and Jaehaerys, under knife point and told her that in order to avenge Lucerys' death, a life was owed, and the queen had to choose which of her two sons was to be killed. Pleading for the two thugs to kill her instead, to no avail, the queen eventually cried out that Maelor, the younger of her boys, was to be struck down, perhaps because Jaehaerys was King Aegon's eldest son and heir. Upon hearing this command, Blood slit Jaehaerys' throat instead. The two assassins then fled, leaving a delirious Queen Helena lying with Maelor, who would live the rest of his life knowing his mother had chosen him to die.